it's something that you learn with life. As you move on with life, you learn to manage your tone and be mindful of how you speak. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when he conversed with people, he had a very soft tone. The Sahaba, they describe him that Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam was not one who raised his voice. Among the Arabs, it was common that when a person would be in the market, specifically when they would be buying and selling and placing bids on items, people would raise their voice above the other person to make sure they were heard. And when the Sahaba describe Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, they say, "Wala sakhaban fil aswaq." That Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam specifically was not one to raise his voice even when it came to the market, when it came to dealing and transacting. There were moments where Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam did raise his voice. For example, when Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam would be giving a khutbah and it was a very passionate subject that he was delivering, so then he would become very passionate when he was speaking. Similarly, when Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was disappointed in someone and he was very angry, he would then raise his voice and then he would speak to that person, letting that person know just from the inflection in his tone that he was not pleased with this individual. But this wasn't the status quo. This wasn't how Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam generally conversed with people. He spoke to them in a very soft tone. One of my good friends, Imam Tahir Anwar, once invited me to his masjid, and he asked that I deliver a Jummah khutbah there. So I was there and I delivered a Jummah khutbah at his request. After the khutbah was over, one of the musallis came and he said to me that I really enjoyed your khutbah. I enjoyed the content. I enjoyed the lessons that we learned. I really wish, though, you weren't shouting at us in the khutbah. You know, we're adults and we prefer that people speak to us in a soft tone. I didn't realize that I had raised my voice in the khutbah. But from that day onwards, I made it a point to take extra attention to that. That when you speak to someone, even if you're giving a lecture, don't raise your voice unless the point you're delivering requires that. People generally appreciate someone talking to them in a tone that they would speak to their friend with, that they would speak to a peer with. A very kind, soft, easygoing tone that isn't heavy on their ears and heavy on their psyche and heavy on their spirit as well. It's easygoing. There's so much research out there, specifically in the area of parenting and nagging. Nagging is something very common with most parents. When they don't like something or when they want something done, they begin to nag. But the psychological harms caused by nagging are so profound and they're so dangerous that it's almost the one thing every parent must make sure they never do. And the thing about nagging is that, for the most part, if you were to study the language, it sounds very normal, that there's nothing that was said that's wrong here. The harm that's done isn't necessarily through the words. It's more done through the tone. It's more done through the body language, the nagging that goes on. It doesn't help. It actually harms, and it's not just a small harm, it is a massive harm caused. So Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when he would speak to people, when he would interact with them, he did so in a very pleasant manner, where the Sahaba appreciated what Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was saying. So be mindful of who you're speaking with, whether it's friends, peers, acquaintances, strangers, the young or the old, and adopt a tone appropriate for that conversation. He then says that it is important to adhere to this with one's parents or someone of their status or those elderly and notable people whom you ought to respect. So there should be a general courtesy offered to everyone, something Shaykh Fattah highlights again and again in the book. That there is general courtesy you offer to everyone, but then you have to remember now when you're dealing with your teachers, when you're dealing with your parents, when you're dealing with elders in the community, that now needs to be emphasized further. You need to now focus on it even more, that if I'm speaking to my parents, what kind of tone should I use? What's the best tone? And we all slip, we all fail. Don't hate yourself for failing, because that's a part of who we are. We all make mistakes. But in your mind, you have to know that my goal needs to be that when I'm speaking with someone who is senior to me, an elderly person, I'm not disrespectful to them, that I speak appropriately to them. Even if what you're saying is right or what you're saying is wrong, I mean, that's a whole different discussion. The objective truth in the conversation is not up for discussion right now. We're not talking about that. We're talking about the way you choose to communicate that to your parents. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us in the Quran, وَاخْفِضْ لَهُمَا جَنَاحَ الذُّلِّ مِنَ الرَّحْمَةِ وَقُلْ رَبِّ ارْحَمْهُمَا كَمَا رَبَّيَانِي صَغِيرًا. Before that, Allah Azza wa Jalla says, إِمَّا يَبْلُغَنَّ عندك الكبر أحدهما أو كلاهما فلا تقل لهما أف ولا تنهرهما وقل لهما قولا كريما. And if you look at the translation of these ayat, this is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying. Be soft, be tender, be kind with your parents. As they get older, their softness will begin to fade and harshness will replace it. And now it's your job to be soft with them as they were with you. وَاخْفِضْ لَهُمَا جَنَاحَ الذُّلِّ وَقُلْ رَبِّ ارْحَمْهُمَا كَمَا رَبَّيَانِي صَغِيرًا. Right? That the one that was soft yesterday is now becoming rough. So now those that are now growing to that age where they are mature, now they need to be soft with their parents and also with their teachers and also with the elderly. The elderly folks in our communities, you have to understand they are rough on the edges because they've gone through life and sometimes they are looking to get to the end goal as soon as possible. Being soft, being kind, it requires you to invest a lot more in each conversation, whether it's just with your words or your emotions, your heart. And when a person is rough, they're basically cutting through all the extra emotions and they're saying, this is the final point. And that comes off to be that rough rock that hasn't been fine-tuned properly. The elders in our community, and I speak on their behalf, just advocating here, it's very possible that they're exhausted, they're tired, they've reached a point in their life where they feel that they don't have the energy to go through all of that anymore. I'm not saying it's right or wrong, I'm just saying that's the way it is, that this is what it is, whether you like it or not is up to you, but this is what's right for you and this is objectively what's wrong here. As younger folks, that's where we need to put on a filter. And we need to be able to listen to them with mercy. Just as we want people to speak with mercy, we have to learn to listen with mercy too. And overlook and understand that maybe one day when I reach an age, I will become that person. So I hope that if I'm kind with someone today, tomorrow someone will be kind with me. We can always have high expectations of people, but the way to actually live in harmony and peace in the world is to, instead of applying those expectations on others, turn them to yourself. But I can tell this person that I need you to speak softly, this elderly person, that you need to lower your voice. Or what I can do is, instead of arguing with that person, just say yes and understand that they're at a point in their life where I'm not going to be able to accomplish much. What I'll do, I'll just say yes and I'll say, okay. And I've learned my lesson, whatever lesson there was there, and moving on when I communicate with other people, I won't make the mistake that I just encountered right now. Right? If in your mind you're set on fixing the world, unfortunately, you're going to be very disappointed because the world isn't going to change on your timeline. The world is going to change on its own timeline. Every person has a window of change, and that window comes to them when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala presents it to them. For someone, it's when they attend a halaqah, another person when they're outside going for a walk, another person while they're doing tilawah. For someone, it's in the middle of a divorce. Everyone has a window of change. They're not going to come to your window. You may want that change from them, but if it's not the right time, then it's not the right time for them. In the meantime, continue to be patient and be a positive contributor to society, to the people around you. Bring peace to their life as you can. Yes?
The Quran tells us that the advice of Luqman the wise to his son was, وَغْضُضْ مِنْ صَوْتِكَ, and lower your voice. So the Luqman ayah number 19.
The ayah then continues. He says, وَقْصِدْ فِي مَشْيِكَ وَغْضُضْ مِنْ صَوْتِكَ, and then what does he say? إِنَّ أَنْكَرَ الْأَصْوَاتِ لَا صَوْتُ الْحَمِيرِ. So he tells his son that walk moderately. وَقْصِدْ فِي مَشْيِكَ. Don't be arrogant when you walk. Be moderate, be calm, be soft when you walk. وَغْضُضْ مِنْ صَوْتِكَ. Waghdud, that means to lower something. قُلْ لِلْمُؤْمِنِينَ يَغُضُّوا مِنْ أَبْصَارِهِمْ, to lower something. So waghdud min sawtik, and lower your voice, humble your voice. Don't be too loud when you talk. And then he says, Inna ankar al-aswati, indeed the most detested of sounds, la sawtul hamid, is the sound of a donkey. Because when a donkey makes its noise, how does it sound? It's a very high pitch, right? And it doesn't sound good. So here he's saying that don't be like a donkey that's always loud. Yes, go ahead.
He directed him to speak in a gentle manner, for speaking loudly is detested and ugly. Verses 2 and 3 of Surah Al-Hujurat read, يا أيها الذين آمنوا لا ترفعوا أصواتكم فوق صوت النبي ولا تجهر له بالقول كجهر بعضكم ببعض أن تحبط أعمالكم وأنتم لا تشعرون إن الذين يغضون أصواتهم عند رسول الله أولئك الذين امتحن الله قلوبهم بالتقوى لهم مغفرة وأجر عظيم. O you who believe, raise not your voices above the voice of the Prophet, nor speak aloud to him as you speak aloud to one another, lest your deeds become vain and you perceive not. Those that lower their voices in the presence of Allah's apostle, Allah has tested their hearts for piety. For them is forgiveness and a great reward.
There was a Sahabi of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. When he heard these verses of the Quran, he was so terrified that he stopped attending the gathering of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And the reason was because he was the khatib, he was a speaker, and he had a very prominent, strong voice. So even when he was having small talk with others, he tended to speak in a louder tone so people could hear him. But he heard this ayah of the Quran that لا ترفعوا أصواتكم فوق صوت النبي, that do not raise your voice above the voice of the Prophet. So now he was terrified that what if I do such a thing? And the only way that he could be sure that he wouldn't do it, because the Quran warned أن تحبط أعمالكم وأنتم لا تشعرون, that your good deeds will be void if you do such a disrespect. Allah will wipe out your good deeds and you won't even realize it. So he was so worried about this that he had stopped attending the gathering of Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam altogether. Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam inquired. He then asked him, where were you? He explained. Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam then gave him confidence that no, you can continue to come here. Continue to come, continue to benefit. But the adab still remains. If you visit the grave of Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam today, Masjid al-Nabwi, Medina Munawwara, may Allah take us all soon. When you stand in front of the grave of Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, right above his grave, this exact ayah is inscribed there. لا ترفعوا أصواتكم فوق صوت النبي, reminding people that will come until the day of judgment to give salam to Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, that don't raise your voice above the voice of Rasulullah. When you're in front of the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, be humble, be soft, be easy. And then he says, إِنَّ الَّذِينَ يَغُضُّونَ أَصْوَاتَهُمْ عِنْدَ رَسُولِ اللَّهِ, indeed those who lower their voices before the Messenger of Allah, أُولَٰئِكَ الَّذِينَ امْتَحَنَ اللَّهُ قُلُوبَهُمْ لِلتَّقْوَى, these are the people who Allah tested their hearts to see their righteousness and their piety. لَهُمْ مَغْفِرَةٌ وَأَجْرٌ عَظِيمٌ, for them is forgiveness and a great reward. I think of this ayah in two ways. There's one that's the most obvious one, which is that when you do speak, lower your volume. That's one right there. That's simple. But there's a second point that I reflect on from this ayah, that if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling the Sahaba to keep the volume of their words lower than that of Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, then what about the intellectual arrogance that people have above revelation? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is also telling them, lower the volume there too. Learn to do ittiba' of the Messenger of Allah. Learn to do ita'ah of the Messenger of Allah. Don't let your ego be so bloated that now you begin to raise the volume there and you're not willing to obey or listen to what Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam has to say and what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has to say. Yes.
Sayyidina Abdullah ibn Zubayr said that after the revelation of these verses, Whenever Sayyidina Umar ibn Khattab radiallahu anhu wanted to address Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, he, Umar radiallahu anhu, would talk as if he was whispering. Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam would even inquire about some of what Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anhu said because he did not hear him well.
This shows us how the Sahaba radwanullahi alayhim ajma'een were very keen to do amal, to practice upon the teachings of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. We live in a world where people are so caught up with understanding the meaning and reason and philosophy behind everything, which has its own merits, by the way. The Sahaba were not like that. For them, once the Quran was revealed, or once Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam said something, what became the priority was how they can do amal on it. How can we practice this? They were a people of practice, a people of amal. And you see this, that when people begin to over-philosophize things, and when they were worried about the reason, the logic behind everything, a little over the top, their amal goes out the window. So when I look at young people in today's Muslim world, I see a people who are so educated about Islam that the average young Muslim in America that I know, their knowledge of Islam is much greater than the average Muslim's knowledge was, let's say 50, 60 years back. The awam al-nas, the common people, didn't know much about their deen. There were some people who were ulama who studied, and they would then tell people, this is what you do, this is what you don't do. The average young person that I meet today knows a decent amount of the deen. They can engage with you. That this, I've heard this opinion, what about that perspective? What about in this scenario? The ilm has gone up, however, let's compare the two again. Those people that lived 50, 60 years ago, you saw them, they were always in the masjid before the adhan was even called. If you went to the masajid before the adhan was called, you saw the sufuf were almost filling in. People were not there. They walked to the masjid every day. They were particular after Fajr Salah. If you sat in the masjid, you would find them reading Quran, doing their adhkar. If you came to the masjid on a Friday before Ghurub, before Maghrib, you found people sitting there with their hands raised, making dua. Read it. Most people were not even capable of reading Yasin in their own in Arabic, so they would read it as a transliteration in their own language. They would find their own language and in whatever language they were reading it, but they would put the words together because they knew this had to be done. Very particular about sunnah. There was no distinction before them between sunnah, wajib, and fard. Fajr was 4 rak'ah, 2 and 2, so they prayed all 4. It wasn't 2 sunnah, 2 fard. Like, these are people who were very focused on amal. Little knowledge, a lot of amal. Here we are, so much more knowledge, but amal is going out the window. Amal are going out the window. The Sahaba radwanullahi alayhim ajma'in were the balance, where they had good knowledge of the deen, but with that they also had good amal of the deen. Knowledge itself won't change much in your life. It's through a'mal and good deeds that change will occur. But again, let me say something to be very honest. A'mal as well themselves won't change you because they can easily become ritual and habits. In order for them to be transformative, the a'mal must be carried out with ikhlas and with sincerity. That's when your change begins. You have sincerity, you have purpose, you have drive, you're doing a good deed. And then as you continue to add knowledge to it and add more perspective, you go deeper and deeper into your actions, and that's where the change actually comes from. Yes, go ahead.
Hafiz al-Dhahabi rahimahullah wrote in his biography of Imam Muhammad ibn Sirin rahimahullah, the eminent scholar and the great tabi'i, that whenever he was in his mother's presence, he would talk in such a low tone that you would think that he was ill. In his biography of Abdul ibn Amr al-Basri, rahimahullah ta'ala, a student of Imam ibn Sirin, rahimahullah ta'ala, and one of the famous scholars, Hafiz al-Dhahabi, rahimahullah ta'ala, noted, once his mother called him, and because he responded with a voice louder than hers, he was fearful and repented by freeing 2 slaves. Asif Asim ibn Fattah al-Kufi, rahimahullah ta'ala, the famous Qadi said, I visited Khalifa Umar ibn Abdul Aziz, rahimahullah, and a man spoke loudly. To this, Khalifa Umar, rahimahullah, replied, stop, you need not talk loudly. You should only talk loud enough to make your listeners hear. Adopt the art of listening. If a person starts telling you something that you know very well, you should pretend as if you do not know it. Do not rush to reveal your knowledge of it or to interfere with his speech. Instead, you should show your attention and concentration. The Honorable Tabi'i Imam Atta bin Abi Rabah said, a young man would tell me something. I would listen to him as if I never heard it before, although I may have heard it even before he was born.
So here, there's a little flexing there, right? But he makes a point here that the art of listening. So it's beautiful because he talks about the etiquettes of conversation first, and then he brings a second chapter, which is the art of listening. The reason behind this is very obvious, that in order to have good communication, you need to speak appropriately, but you also need to listen properly too. He says here that you should pretend as if you do not know it. When someone tells you something, instead of interrupting and saying, yes, I've heard this hadith, or yes, I know this story, or yes, I know this Quranic ayah, or yes, I know this recipe, there's a few things happening here. The first thing that's happening is that this person who's telling you their story, there's an excitement on their part. Would you guys agree? Something that's important to them, something they've looked forward to maybe share this piece of information. When you jump in and you cut them off, what happens? They lose their excitement. You kind of kill their mojo. My daughter, she goes to an Islamic school, so every now and then she'll come back and tell me a hadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. She says, sallallahu alaihi wasallam said. That's how she starts her stories. Sallallahu alaihi wasallam said. I say, yes, beta, what did he say? And she'll make up something really random. Something she knows is a good thing that I should agree with, that I probably agree with because it's a good idea. Like, sallallahu alaihi wasallam said to put your shoes on the rack. So originally I would tell her, no, he did not say that. Then my wife said to me that you need to stop doing this, right? Because this is not a moment to do any fact checking. Rather, she's excited to share this. So just listen to it and nod your head and be excited. And I noticed that when I started doing that, she just became more happy. She was more excited to talk about Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So when someone's sharing something with you, I know there is a desire to fact check them, to correct them maybe, or to even tell the story. Trust me, it happens with me all the time. Or if someone's sharing something, I'm really inclined to tell them, that's not what happened actually. Or maybe this is another variation. This is a more authentic version of what happened. Nerding out a little. But you have to realize, if you nerd out in that moment, the chances are you're being more of a jerk to that person. What needs to happen is you just need to hear them out. Just listen to what they're saying. When you listen to them, he says, you should pretend as if you do not know it. I think this is beautiful too. One thing is when you pretend that you don't know it, you listen to that person attentively and allow that person to fully share what it is they're sharing. Then obviously if the opportunity presents itself and there is a need for some fact checking, you can go ahead and do that. If it's appropriate to do so. But there's a second thing here that I think is also beautiful, which is that when you sit there and listen to someone as if you have no idea what they're saying, you don't project your own mind, your own realities onto them. You listen to it for the way they're trying to say it. You guys understand this? If you've already made your mind up that you know this situation, then you're not listening, you're just projecting on that person. That from my view, this is right and this is wrong, therefore this person must be right, this person must be wrong. But when you, like he says here, pretend as if you do not know it. Now you're giving that person a chance to start right from the beginning. That you tell me what's going on in this marriage. You tell me what's going on in this business relationship. You tell me what's going on with your health. I don't want to tell you what I'm going through. You tell me what you're going through. That way, when you do listen to that person, there's just a lot more ikhlas there. And ikhlas is something that the other individual who is doing the speaking will very much appreciate. So he says that you should show attention and concentration. That show attention. Look at that person. Give them some eye-to-eye contact, or maybe make sure you're nodding your head along the way to make sure that they know that you're listening and you're paying attention to them. They say that if you want someone to know that you're listening to them when it comes to eye-to-eye contact, you should try to focus on the triangle. You guys know the triangle? It's kind of like this area between the nose and mouth area. That this is the triangle, they say, that your eyes should be focused on the triangle. If you feel very confident, then you can include the eyes into that triangle. But eye contact is a tricky one because if you don't land it right, it gets awkward very quickly, right? So that's why for most people, rather than making eye contact, they just say, look at the nose and the mouth area. That way you can maintain, that person feels that you're paying attention and that you're connected with them. In today's world, what happens when people are talking to you, what are other people doing usually? They're on their phones, right? So if you're on your phones taking notes, it's a good idea to tell people that I'm taking notes. Otherwise, the assumption is that you're playing Candy Crush. That's what we will assume. Yes, go ahead.
Khalid ibn Safwan al-Tamimi, rahimahullah ta'ala, who was a companion of the two Khalifas, Sayyidina Umar ibn Abdul Aziz and Khalifa Hisham ibn Abdul, rahimahullah ta'ala, said, if a person tells you something which you have heard before, or news that you already know of, do not interrupt him so as to exhibit your knowledge to those present. This is a sign of being rude and ill-mannered. The Honorable Imam Abdul.
So that's an interesting point that he mentions here. That when you are interrupting people, one possibility could be that you're interrupting them because you want to make a point that you've already thought of this. If you've already thought of something and you're going to ask someone to listen to you, or you're going to have a conversation with someone, and you're not interested in hearing that from that individual again, then just make it clear that I've already thought of all these things and maybe you can help me out in a particular area. Does that make sense? Because now when that person starts speaking and then you continuously interrupt them, that individual is going to wonder, then why did you come to me in the first place? Right? Why are we even having this conversation if I'm going to be constantly interrupted? So when someone is talking to you, even though what they're saying to you, you may have considered it. Someone said, I don't think you should think of so-and-so for marriage because of X, Y, and Z reason. Even if you've considered it, don't say it. By telling that person you've considered it, it's not like it's going to change the course of the conversation. You can listen to that whole part of the whole part of what they're saying, and then if there's something that still remains outstanding, you can then ask them to share on that independently. That yes, you talked about this situation, but what about this other situation? Listen to people. Yes.
The Honorable Imam Abdullah ibn Wahab al-Qurashi al-Misri, who is a companion of Imams Malik, Layth ibn Sa'ad, and Thawri, rahimahullah ta'ala, said, sometimes a person would tell me a story that I have heard before his parents had wed, yet I listen as if I've never heard it before.
That's another flex there. He said, not only did I hear it before he was born, I heard it before his parents even got married. But that's a fact, right? And it also shows the humbleness of these scholars. And we're looking at it from one angle, but look at it from that other perspective. He is this giant scholar who studied with Layth bin Sa'ad, Sufyan al-Thawri, who studied with Imam Malik. I mean, for students of knowledge, those three names are enough to shake the room, right? These are really great human beings. These are intellectuals. He studied with these people, the earliest and the greatest of scholars. And even then, when people come and tell him stuff, he already knows it, but he still listens attentively and carefully to what's being said. Yes.
Sayyidina Ibrahim ibn Junayd rahimahullah ta'ala said, a wise man once said to his son, learn to listen properly just as you learn to speak properly. Listening properly means maintaining eye contact, allowing the speaker to finish the speech, and restraining yourself from interrupting the speech, even if you are aware of what he is saying. Khatib al-Baghdadi rahimahullah ta'ala said in a poem, "A talk never interrupt, though you know it in and out." Discussions and debates. If you are having difficulty understanding some of what has been said by the speaker, restrain yourself until he finishes, and thereafter ask for clarification gently, politely, and with a proper introduction. Do not interrupt a person's talk. This is contrary to the proper manner of listening and stirs up contempt in the heart. However, this is not the case if it is a gathering of studying and learning. In such a case, asking questions and initiating the discussion is desirable if conducted respectfully and tactfully, and only after the teacher finishes. Khalif al-Ma'mun rahimahullah ta'ala said, "Discussion entrenches knowledge more than mere acceptance." Imam Haytham al-Hadi, rahimahullah ta'ala, a known scholar and historian as well, one of the companions of the four Khalifas, Abu Ja'far al-Mansuri, al-Mahdi al-Hadi, and Abu Rashid, rahimahullah ta'ala, said, "The men of wisdom say, it is disrespectful to overwhelm people as they speak and to interrupt them before they end their speech."
That's fascinating. It is disrespectful to overwhelm people as they speak. Do you guys know what that means? It's disrespectful to overwhelm people while they speak. When someone's speaking and they're saying something, you just keep interrupting, you keep speaking over them, you keep raising your voice to the point where you overwhelm that person. And now this person isn't emotionally there anymore to be confident to convey their point properly. This basically is bullying. You're bullying that person. You know that you can do this, so you're flexing a little and you're causing harm to this person. Debate and discussion is something that the ulama generally say should be avoided at all cost. The reason for this is it's very tricky. For most people, debate and discussion leads to people's hearts being broken, someone hurting someone else, someone being badly hurt. You have to ask yourself that before I go into discussion with someone, the person that I'm going into discussion with, what is their capacity for discussion? You guys understand this? Imagine yourself as a great athlete at something, or a great sportsman, or someone who's really good at a particular task. You're really good at it. You're really good at it. You know that I am good at this particular thing. Let's say someone's a weightlifter, or they're a basketball player, or they're a soccer player. Now, when you're playing with other people, if you want to crush them, you just play full force, or do your thing full force. That other person who's probably an amateur, or someone who's maybe done this once or twice in their life, won't stand a chance, and if anything, they'll be heartbroken and they'll go home. Or what you can do is tone things down to let them enjoy themselves in that moment as well. The same thing goes with debating and discussions. Debating is a skill. In order for you to be a successful debater, you need a personality. You need a drive. You need to have a level of confidence. If I may say, some ego as well. All of that put together, you must know that not everyone's going to have that. And you might be Mike Tyson here, who has the ability to punch holes through walls, and this person in front of you is probably not trained at all in any of this. They're just complete amateurs. And if you swing at them, and if you give them arguments like this, there's no chance you're going to convince them. Rather, in the process, you're going to shatter their skull into pieces. The harm could be tremendous. You can break someone. And I've seen this more common than not, that there are some people who are good at debate, and they keep using that tool of debating to shatter people, to break people, to hurt people. I'm not sure if they do it intentionally, hopefully not intentionally, but the outcome still remains that so many people are hurt. And then for every debater, a new debater comes up, right? And then another debater comes up, and then another debater comes up. Before now, you have a world of human beings that are good at debating. And a system of debaters is very dangerous. A society that's based on people debating one another is not good. Because, in particular, if they don't know the proper adab of debating, if they don't know the proper etiquette of debating, if these people are all vile, violent bullies that are using religion or politics or whatever it is, and everyone's just going at each other, what happens is when this happens, the value of truth goes out the window, and it's more about who can get the upper hand against the other. So convincing is no longer done through debates at this point. At this point, it's just about identity protection. You protect your identity, you protect your identity. And if you want to understand what that looks like, go look at the American presidential election cycle just recently. You'll see it all. That's what happened. People were just debating each other, fighting with each other, debating and fighting, debating and fighting. No one's getting convinced to any truth at all. It's just turned into a big dumpster fire. This is what Imam Ghazali refers to. He says that in his time, he noticed that this became common among scholars, that everyone was just debating and fighting, debating and fighting, debating and fighting. As a result of that, the awam al-nas, the common folks, rather than actually looking for guidance, they were all trying to find a sheikh who was a good debater and standing behind him and saying, yes, here comes our sheikh, like it's some sort of a WWF fighter. And here comes John Cena. There, John Cena. Everyone's excited. And no one's interested in the haqq or the truth anymore. I've seen this, unfortunately, back home in Muslim countries, not one, but many of them, where everyone's at everyone's throat. You're this group, I'm that group, you're this group, I'm that group, and they just keep from the minbar bashing each other, bashing each other. The common people that are listening have no idea what's going on, but they're just on the ride. They're just with them, tagging along. So when you decide to engage in a debate or a passionate discussion, I want you to really ask yourself, is it worth it or not? Why are you doing this? What are you planning to get out of this? If you notice that this discussion that you guys are having right now, the correct way to season wings or the correct way to smoke a brisket, if you're about to go in on it and you're about to get all messy over it, you have to ask yourself, are you being sincere and is it worth it? Half the times you go to a Friday, Saturday evening dinner, and there are two dudes who are really going at each other. I don't know if it's like this on the sister side, but on the guy's side, this always happens. There's two guys that are almost at each other's necks over something that's so silly, over like, you know, what's the better IT protocol in the 21st century? And you're like, get a room, you two. And they're just like, you know, just going at each other, going at each other, going at each other. And it's almost shameful. Like, you're adults. You have kids running around here. This is how you talk? Did no one ever teach you self-restraint? Do you not know the etiquette of gatherings? Do you not know that this is not how you do it? You present a point and you walk away. That's it. There's no need for a second or third point. This person's not here to follow your madhab. They're not giving bay'ah to you. This is not a murid of yours that you have to tell them everything. Just present your point and move on. Yes.
Answer only if you are asked. If a colleague was asked about something that you know, do not hasten to answer. Instead, you should only say something when you are asked. This is better etiquette and a nobler attitude. It generates interest in what you say while enhancing your respect. The Honorable Tabi, Mujahid ibn Jabir, rahimahullah ta'ala, recalled that Luqman the Wise, rahimahullah ta'ala, said to his son, if another person was asked a question, never hasten to give the answer, as if you're going to gain booty or win a prize. By doing so,
in those days after the war was over, when people would go to collect the spoils of war, they would rush to it because they really wanted it, right? Someone else might take it. What if someone takes this shield? What if someone takes that money? So that sword, so they would rush to it. So here he's saying that as if you're rushing to go collect some wealth. Don't, slow down. Let this person say their piece. And if they ask someone else a question, the one who's asked, let them talk. You're not a part of this conversation. Yes, sometimes a teacher will be teaching and they'll ask a student a question. And what are all the other students doing? They're clearly not this quiet. They're all whispering and answering, and you say, Baba, sabr karo. Be patient. Your turn will come too. Right now, I'm trying to specifically engage a part of the class or an individual. I want this person to engage. If they don't engage, we'll come to you next. You have to learn to be patient in that moment. Don't rush. Mm-hmm.
By doing so, you will belittle the one who was asked, you will offend the questioner, and you will draw the attention of the foolish people to your stupidity and ill manner. Shaykh Ibn Fattah, rahimahullah ta'ala, the Hanbali jurist and muhaddith, said, I was with Abu Umar al-Zahid Muhammad ibn Abdul al-Wahid al-Baghdadi, the Imam and linguist, also known as Ghulam al-Tha'lab, rahimahullah ta'ala. He, Abu Umar, rahimahullah ta'ala, was asked regarding an issue. I hastened and answered the inquirer. He turned to me and said, do you know the nosy and inquisitive ones, suggesting that I was a nosy person? This made me feel very embarrassed.
Yep. Sometimes you bring it onto yourself, right? So you sit back and remain silent. Okay, folks, we'll close today's gathering here. We pray that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us tawfiq to understand this and allows us to live by good akhlaq, allows us to be great listeners and also great communicators, those who embody the prophetic example. Wa sallallahu ta'ala ala Sayyidina Muhammad. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.